Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Asmi and I'm from English Education B. So in this video, I'm going to review chapter 2 in a book written by Brown with the title Teaching by Principle. So there are several terms that we need to know before we jump further into the explanation in this chapter. So the first term is methodology. So methodology is a pedagogical practices in general, including theoretical understanding and related research. Whatever consideration are involved in how to teach are methodological. The second term is approach. So approach is a theoretically well-informed positions and beliefs about the nature of language learning, and the applicability of both to pedagogical settings. And the next term is method, which is a generalized set of classroom specifications for accomplishing linguistic objectives. Methods tend to be concerned primarily with teacher and students' roles and behaviors, and secondarily with such features as linguistic and subject matter objectives, sequencing, and materials. And the next term is curriculum or syllabus, which is designed for carrying out a particular language program. Features include a primary concern with the specifications of linguistic and subject matter objectives, sequencing, and materials to meet the needs of a decided group of learners in a defined context. And then the last term is technique, also commonly referred to by other terms. So any of a wide variety of exercises, activities, or tasks used in the language classroom from realizing lesson objectives. The first part of the materials we have changing winds and shifting sands. So Albert Weckpart saw these changing winds and shifting sands as a cyclical pattern in which a new method emerged about every quarter of a century. Each new method broke from the old but took with it some of the positive aspects of the previous practices. A good example of this cyclical nature of method is found in the revolutionary audiolingual method, or ALM, of the mid-20th century. And the next material is the grammar translation method. So as other language began to be tough in educational institutions in the 18th century and 19th centuries, the classical method was adopted as the chief means for teaching foreign language. In the 19th century, of the classical method come to be known as the grammar translation method. And Prater and Celsi-Murcia listed several major characteristics of grammar translation method. And the first characteristic is classes are taught in mother tongue with little active use of the target language. And the second characteristic is much vocabulary is taught in the form of list of isolated words. And the third is long, elaborate explanations of the intricacies of grammar are given. And the fourth characteristic is grammar provides the rules for putting words together, and instruction often focuses on the form and inflections of words. And the fifth characteristic is reading of difficult classical texts is begun early. And the sixth characteristic is little attention is paid to the content of texts which are treated as exercises in grammatical analysis. And the last characteristic is often the only drills are exercises in translating disconnected sentences from the target language into the mother tongue. And then we have Goin and the series method. So Goin said the series method, which is a method that taught learners directly without translations, and conceptually without grammatical rules and explanation, as a series of connected sentences that are easy to perceive. And then we have the direct method. So the basic premise of direct method was similar to going series method, namely that the second language learning should be more like first language learning. Lots of oral interactions, spontaneous use of the language, not translating between first and second languages, and little or no analysis of grammatical rules. And Richard and Rogers summarize the principles of the direct method, which is there is 8 characteristics, and the first one is classroom instruction was conducted exclusively in the target language. And the second, we have only everyday vocabulary and sentences were taught. And then we have oral communication skills were built up in carefully threaded progressions organized around questions and answer exchange between teachers and students in small intensive classes. And then we have grammar was taught inductively. And the next is new teaching points were taught through modeling and practice. And then we have concrete vocabulary was taught through demonstrations, objects, and pictures. Abstract vocabulary was taught by associations of ideas. And then we have both speech and listening comprehensions were taught. And the last is correct pronunciations and grammar were emphasized. The next method we have audiolingual method, also known as ELM. So before 1950s, audiolingual method was known as Army method, and there are 12 characteristics based on Prater and Salsi Murcia. And the first characteristic is new material is presented in dialogue form, and the second characteristic is there is dependence on mimicry, memorizing of set phrases, and overlearning. Next, we have structures are sequences by means of constructive analysis and thought one at a time. And the fourth, we have structural patterns are taught using repetitive drills. And the fifth, we have there is little or no grammatical explanations. So grammar is taught by inductive analogy rather than by deductive explanations. And the sixth characteristic, we have vocabulary is strictly limited and learned in context. And then we have there is much use of tapes, language labs, and visual aids. And the eighth characteristic is great importance is attached to pronunciations. And then we have very little use of the mother tongue by teacher is permitted. And the next characteristic we have such as full responses are immediately reinforced. And then the next characteristic we have there is a great effort to get students to produce error-free utterance. And the last characteristic we have there is a tendency to manipulate language and discredit content. And then we have cognitive code learning. So cognitive code learning was not so much a method as it was an approach that emphasized a conscious awareness of rules and their application to second language learning. It was reactions to the strictly behavioristic practices of the ELM, and ironically a return to some of the practices of grammar translations. And the last we have designer method of this spreaded 1970s. So the scrutiny that the designer method underwent has enabled us to incorporate certain elements tariff in our current communicative approaches to language teaching. So there are 5 products of the spreaded 1970s, and the first one we have commodity language learning. It is a classical example of an effectively based method. And the second we have Suggestopedia, and the third we have the silent way. The fourth we have total physical response, and the last we have the natural approach. As the innovative method of the 1970s were being tough by some and criticized by many, some significant foundations for future growth were being laid in what soon came to be popularly known as the National Functional Syllabus. I think that's all from my explanation for this chapter. Hope you like it. Uh, Thank you very much, and I'm sorry for some errors that I might have said in the explanations. Thank you. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.